She thought she was just giving a few forgotten kids a reason to smile. But when a stranger with a hidden fortune saw what she did, he decided her kindness deserved more than just thanks. It deserved a miracle. The neon sign above Charlie's diner buzzed weakly against the darkening sky, throwing pale yellow light across the cracked parking lot. Inside, business was slow. It usually was on weeknights. The booths were mostly empty, except for a few tired truckers and old regulars nursing coffee refills. Lila Parker, 28, wiped down tables with quick, practiced hands. She had pulled a double shift again, her sneakers worn thin, her apron stained from too many hours on her feet. Rent was due. The car needed repairs. Her tips barely covered gas and groceries these days. Still, Lila smiled through it all, because that's who she was. Someone who refused to let the hard edges of life harden her heart. That evening, just as she was closing up, the door swung open. 6 small kids filed in, led by a frazzled young social worker with exhaustion written all over her face. The kids' clothes were hand-me-downs, shoes too big or too small, hair messy but faces bright with a kind of reckless hope. Lila's heart squeezed painfully at the sight. The social worker, cheeks red with embarrassment, approached the counter. "I'm so sorry. We're from St. Mary's Orphanage. We thought we could grab a quick meal for the kids, but the group before us ate more than we budgeted for. We don't really have enough left." She bit her lip, clearly mortified. "It's one of the boys' birthdays today. We just wanted to make it special." Lila glanced at the kids, chatting excitedly about pancakes, balloons, birthday candles, and made her decision in a heartbeat. "You all sit down," she said, beaming. "Birthday pancakes are on me." The social worker's eyes widened. "No, we couldn't." "You can," Lila said firmly. "And you will." Without waiting for thanks, she sprinted back to the kitchen, rallying the sleepy cook. Together they whipped up stacks of chocolate chip pancakes, topped with sprinkles and whipped cream. Lila scrounged up a handful of paper party hats from an old supply closet. She even grabbed a tiny plastic dinosaur from the forgotten prize drawer behind the counter and wrapped it in a napkin as a gift. When she brought the food out, singing a slightly off-key but heartfelt "Happy Birthday," the kids' faces lit up like fireworks. They whooped, they laughed, they devoured every last bite. And for a little while, inside that worn-out diner under the flickering neon lights, magic lived. What Lila didn't know was that someone else had been watching the entire time. A stranger sitting quietly in a booth near the window. No flashy suit, no obvious wealth. Just an older man with kind eyes, and a past full of secrets he had carried alone for too long. And tonight, he had found exactly what he didn't even know he was searching for. Because Lila's small, selfless act was about to turn into the greatest gift she never asked for. The kids clapped wildly as Lila placed a sparkler in the middle of the pancakes, the tiny flame crackling and spinning light across their beaming faces. She laughed along with them, her heart full despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. A few booths away, Walter King, 63, set down his coffee cup and quietly watched every second unfold. To everyone else, Walter looked like just another tired traveler. Gray hoodie, jeans, battered sneakers. But beneath the simple clothes was a man who owned half the real estate downtown. A man who had built an empire, then spent the last decade realizing he had no one to share it with. Widowed young, no children, no family left. Wealth had bought him freedom, power, even fear from others. But it had never bought him kindness freely given. The kind that didn't expect anything back. Until tonight. Walter motioned for the check. Lila bustled over, cheeks flushed from the birthday excitement. Hope you enjoyed your coffee, she said brightly, wiping her hands on her apron. Walter smiled, sliding a thick envelope across the counter instead of a bill. For the birthday boy, he said simply. Before she could protest, he rose from the booth, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Confused, Lila opened the envelope. At first glance, it looked like a card. Inside was a handwritten note. Kindness is rare. Keep doing what you're doing. Sometimes life thanks you in bigger ways than you expect. And tucked inside the note, a cashier's check. Lila's breath caught. She blinked, thinking surely it was a mistake. $50,000. $50,000! Her knees nearly gave out. She looked up, heart pounding, but the man was already pushing through the door into the rainy night. Wait, she called, dashing outside barefoot onto the wet sidewalk. Walter turned, his hood shielding him from the drizzle. I can't take this, she gasped, the envelope pressed against her chest. Walter chuckled softly. You already did. He stepped closer, lowering his hood so she could see him clearly. I've built towers and companies, but tonight, watching you buy pancakes with your own paycheck, watching you make those kids feel like kings and queens for a night, that's the kind of wealth I want to invest in now. Lila's hands shook. But I'm just a waitress. Walter's smile deepened. Exactly. That's why you're the right person. He slipped another smaller card into her hand before walking into the rain. It simply said, W. King Holdings, Private Meeting Invitation. And scrawled beneath it, let's talk about building something bigger together. Lila stood there in the drizzle, barefoot, heart pounding, staring after the man who had just upended her entire world with quiet generosity. She had no idea yet that the $50,000 was only the beginning, because kindness, once seen by the right eyes, doesn't just ripple, it roars. And by the time this stranger's full plan was revealed, Lila Parker's name would be known far beyond Charlie's diner. The rain had soaked through her socks by the time Lila finally walked back into the diner, the envelope clutched tightly in her trembling hands. The kids were still laughing at their booth, finishing the last crumbs of their birthday feast, oblivious to the life-changing moment that had just happened outside. Lila barely slept that night. The check felt like a dream she might wake up from. The small business card burned a hole in her mind, daring her to believe, maybe for the first time, that something bigger than survival was waiting for her. The next afternoon, Lila stood nervously in front of the glass doors of W. King Holdings, her only good dress clinging awkwardly to her frame. People in sleek suits brushed past her without a glance. She wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt and pushed the door open. A receptionist looked up immediately, smiling as if she'd been expecting her. Ms. Parker, right this way. Lila blinked. Ms. Parker? No one ever said her name like that, with respect. They led her to a private conference room filled with warm sunlight and a wall of photos, schools, community centers, homeless shelters, each one bearing the same small logo at the bottom, W. King Community Trust. Before she could piece it together, the door opened, and Walter King stepped inside, wearing the same calm smile he had worn in the diner. Lila, he said warmly, offering his hand. Thank you for coming. I still don't understand, she whispered, overwhelmed. Walter motioned for her to sit and slid a thick folder across the table. Inside, deed documents, trust papers, a certified letter, all with her name on them. I don't just want to give you money, Walter said softly. I want to give you a future. I want you to run the community initiative we're building, a foundation for kids like the ones you fed, birthday parties, after-school programs, scholarships. He leaned back, his eyes serious but kind. You have the heart this project needs. The money, the structure, the connections, I'll provide those, but the spirit? That has to come from someone who understands what it means to give without expecting anything back. Lila's hand shook as she flipped through the paperwork. At the bottom of the stack, an official title. Executive Director, King's Heart Foundation, and next to it, an initial deposit, $1 million, to manage, to grow, to change lives. Tears blurred Lila's vision. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Walter smiled, the kind of smile that said he had been waiting a very long time to find someone exactly like her. "Because kindness like yours deserves to shape the world, not struggle against it." Outside the window, the city buzzed by, full of people chasing power and money. But inside that sunlit room, a barefoot waitress who once believed she was invisible was handed the keys to build something real. But Lila's story wasn't over yet, because building dreams wasn't easy, and holding on to goodness in a world that wanted to swallow it whole would test her more than she ever imagined, and her next choice would determine whether kindness could truly survive success. In the months that followed, the name King's Heart Foundation began to spread across the city like wildfire. Not because of glitzy ads, not because of flashy events, but because of something rarer. Real, honest hope. And at the center of it all was Lila Parker, the same waitress who once scraped by on tips and tired smiles, now standing before classrooms of underprivileged kids, opening doors they had been taught their whole lives were locked. She built birthday parties for orphans who had never blown out a candle, homework clubs for kids who needed a quiet place to dream, shoe drives for teens walking to school in the rain, mentorship programs where every child was told over and over, "You are not invisible." And she didn't sit behind a desk giving orders. She was there every single day, taping balloons to gym walls, serving cupcakes with frosting-streaked fingers, holding sobbing children after a tough day, living the mission with the same worn sneakers she once gave away. Walter King watched from a quiet distance, his heart fuller than any profit margin had ever made it. He had invested in 100 companies. But this was the first time he felt like he had invested in a soul. But success came with shadows. Big corporate donors came knocking, wanting to slap their logos on the foundation's name. Politicians offered endorsements. Luxury brands wanted to sponsor her events for PR points. Each offer dangled money, influence, prestige. Each offer whispered, "Sell a little piece of yourself. It's just business." And every time, Lila thought of that rainy night in Charlie's diner. The kids in paper hats, the pancakes, the sparkler lighting up a boy's face like he was the richest king in the world. She thought of what real wealth looked like. And she said no, over and over again. She protected the foundation the way she would have protected those kids at her diner. Because you don't sell kindness. You build it, you guard it, you give it away freely. 1 year later, at the foundation's anniversary gala, Lila stood on stage in front of a packed room. Parents, kids, volunteers, teachers, city leaders. Dressed simply, speaking without notes. Her voice cracked with emotion. "I started with nothing but a tray of pancakes and a lot of heart. I didn't have money. I didn't have connections. All I had was a choice, to show up for someone who needed it. And because of that choice, I'm standing here today." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Even Walter wiped away a tear. A framed photo now hangs in the lobby of King's Heart Foundation headquarters. It's not glossy or posed. It's Lila Parker, laughing barefoot in the rain with 6 orphan kids under a flickering neon sign. The caption reads, "Sometimes the smallest kindness becomes the spark that lights the whole world." Because in a city built on power and money, it was a waitress's stubborn, generous heart that built something money could never buy. And in the end, It was love, not wealth, that made her a millionaire.